This is the Wenning Strength Podcast, brought to you by Wenning Strength and Wenning Strength Media. For printed copies of match training manuals, custom equipment, online coaching and analysis, and information on upcoming seminars, go to wenningstrength.com. For DVDs, digital downloads, and digital copies of all of Matt's manuals, go to wenningstrengthmedia.com. This episode of the Wenning Strength Podcast was recorded the week leading up to the 2018 Arnold Fitness Expo in Columbus, Ohio. Stan the Rhino Efferding was in town to help manage the nutrition for Thor and Brian Shaw. Matt and Stan are friends and have worked together before. If you haven't already done so, make sure you check out our video with Stan where we go to Costco and buy those two gigantic men food while traveling on the road in Columbus. Enjoy. All right, coming to you from Lewis Magnus Gym in Columbus, Ohio. It is the Wenning Strength Podcast. Here's Matt Wenning.
Hey, what's going on, guys? So we got one of my good friends, Stan Efferding here, the Rhino. What's going on, big guy?
Doing good. Can you hear me okay from here, over there?
Yes.
Yeah. Because I refuse to put this any closer to my mouth.
Look, we can just be comfortable here. I mean, we're all friends.
Why can't we have like a pussy-shaped microphone? Why does it always have to look like this?
Yeah.
Huh? I'd have it like right up in my face if it was a pussy-shaped microphone.
Honestly, our last couple podcasts, we actually made the guests sit on the microphone. So
Nice.
we've changed things a little bit for you.
It was all muffled.
Sonar.
The sound was terrible.
So, I'm sorry.
No
be
big
serious
deal.
podcast?
Not
Okay.
at all.
No.
Cut.
Yeah. We're not
So-
this one over.
I mean, I've known you for quite a while, and a lot of it through other sources. Like, I've known Mark Bell for almost 20 years.
Yeah.
And
Sorry
I
to hear
remember when you first came on the scene, which is probably about 2009, 10-ish,
Yeah.
is when I started seeing Mark was posting stuff. And I was just first starting writing in his magazine. I did a article on Chuck.
Yep.
And then the Raw scene has started to come along, and I think you're one of the first guys that really pushed the Raw scene. But starting back a little bit, how did you get into lifting? Because I think a lot of people know, hey, you're a badass, you've been a badass for a lot of years, but
Yeah.
your background story is really good because you came reverse from me. I graduated high school at 250,
I know.
and you graduated high school weighing what?
I was 135.
Yeah, so I have people that tell me that you can't get big and strong because they
Yeah.
don't have the genetics. Maybe partially true, but I mean, you're like me in a lot of ways that you just clawed and scratched and grinded your way up.
And that's it. I mean, it just takes a lot longer.
Yeah.
If you don't come, the whole genetic thing, you just have to be really persistent.
Yeah.
As the body resists you every step of the way.
Mm-hmm.
Keep hitting those plateaus, and you got to keep grinding through them and keep resetting that the homeostatic mechanism. And that's, I would go sometimes, 6, 7, 8, 9 months without gaining a pound, and just be beating my head against the wall. This is why I feel I'm good at helping people with their nutrition and gaining muscle, is because I just for 30 years I've gained and lost weight from 135 to 300, back down to 220, back up to 300, back down to 230, back up to 300, back down to 240. I've just been doing this back and forth, constantly manipulating how I can best gain size and strength, and how I can best get shredded, because I competed in both powerlifting and bodybuilding. So it's been a long time coming, and I obviously I studied a lot along the way, studied exercise science. I said before that I was scrolling through microfiche at the science library back in the 80s, and nowadays you just get on the internet and boom, there it is.
So what got you involved? I mean, how did you, what age did you start?
Yeah, just a skinny kid in college.
So in college,
Wanted to
so
try
we're
and get
talking
jacked,
18, 20?
Yeah, I had one of those little sand-filled weight sets in the garage when I was 14, but
same here.
You go out there and
Don't know what the fuck you're
you
doing.
don't know what you're doing. Do some chin-ups and push-ups.
Okay, so you got the real bug probably in college.
Yeah, I think so. That was about the time that being skinny wasn't cool.
Yeah.
Interesting thing about when I started back in college is that we didn't have all the information we have today.
Right.
I just assumed that the stronger you got, the bigger you got.
Yeah.
And so I just lifted heavy all the time.
Yeah.
Although prepping for bodybuilding shows you do more reps.
Yeah.
Only because you thought that's what made you harder.
Right.
It was completely the wrong philosophy, but competing in both powerlifting and bodybuilding kind of helped me at least use enough methods to where I was...
And develop the work ethic.
Yeah, that too.
I think that's one of the big things is guys that lift heavy shit have an insane work ethic. They can push through shit that normal people can't push through.
And you have to, I know there's a lot of stuff going around about, stimulate, don't annihilate, and I'm a big believer in that. And, don't always go to failure, and I'm a big believer in that. But over time, we talked about this yesterday, you have to continue to take your body somewhere it hasn't been before.
Yeah.
And the linear progression, whether or not that's undulating or however over the course of months or years, you do have to get stronger or push more volume to grow.
And I think probably the first time you've ever got introduced to a system similar, not probably exactly the same, but similar, was probably talking with Mark Bell, because he got you ready for a lot of those raw meats. Am I correct?
Yeah.
So I think you guys were using a similar system to what I was using at that time, which was you were changing exercises weekly, but pushing really hard, having max days and speed days.
Yeah. And I had to be real cautious about joint health. I've talked about this a lot too, because I was 40 when I was lifting with Mark.
Right.
And so I was already subject to a lot of, I think, accumulative strain and wear and tear. And so I had to be careful about the frequency with which I did certain exercises that would put my joints in a position to where, obviously squatting, grind on your elbows and your knees. And so we did mix it up. We used safety squat bar, and we did some box work, and we did some band work, and some floor presses to try and save the elbow joints, save the shoulders.
And that's where I always try to tell people what I talk about is train as if all those places are going to be injured, and rotate your pressure points all the time. Therefore, you can keep the wear and tear down. And that's why I'll be 40 here pretty soon, and joints, knees, everything are in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
But it's because every week I've changed the pressure. So I might go hard every week, but that hardness comes from a different way.
You can set PRs in any number of ways. Like you said, different exercises, different rep ranges, different rest periods, different volume goals.
Yeah.
So, but you do have to continue to set PRs.
Right.
In some area, whether it be strength or endurance or what have you, to simulate the body to grow.
Exactly. So what I think is really interesting about you is obviously being very successful in all the things that you've touched. How did you balance going through college, having a really good job, and then training that hard? I think I see this a lot with my fire departments and my guys. Like, oh well, I got kids, I can't do that kind of training. It's excuse and excuse and excuse. How did you maintain an ability to be able to train through all of your success outside of the gym?
Well,
is it a mindset?
I've said this in my rants about why I'm a hypocrite. I didn't have kids, and that's one area in which I'm sensitive to, because now that I do, I understand that everything I do takes time away for me, takes time away from them. And I'm not necessarily willing to make that sacrifice. Whereas historically, without kids, I would make every sacrifice, and that's what I did. Is that it's a compromise, and you just have to determine what your priorities are, and anything that distracts from that, you just have to let go of.
Yeah.
And I've said a million times that the things I did outside the gym is that I ate and slept religiously, and so I didn't go out. I was in bed by 10 o'clock every single night, and I never missed workouts. I never missed meals.
Yeah.
The logistics of the whole thing was that I would plan to make sure I had my meals prepped for me no matter where I was.
Right.
Which bode well for me, as I came along in my career, because I was traveling a lot.
Yeah.
And I already knew how to schedule packing all my meals.
You made it a lifestyle, whatever that meant, that's what you did.
And that became the priority for me. We spoke, and I told you that I don't even get involved with a lot of people's training programs, because I don't believe that's where the next improvement is. I think that there's shortcomings in most people. That's what I found. You got people like Hafthor and Brian Shaw, who are already at the top of their game. You go in and dig around deep enough, and you start to find big holes. They know how to train.
Yep.
There's no question.
They know what works for them.
They know what works for them. But you find some holes in their game, and they're usually they're always outside the gym.
Yep.
And so I didn't get involved in their programming for their training. And if I thought their training was the most important thing, I'd have been there working out with them.
Yeah.
But I didn't. I didn't think that at all. And so I thought that all the logistics behind the scenes, the sleep and the sleep quality, the blood tests to make sure they're healthy, the nutrition program that I put them on to change their body composition, improve their strength and recovery, those things are things that I always did very, 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 very well. And I constantly tried to manipulate to optimize performance and health.
And that was one of the first things I ever recognized from you. I don't know if I had saw an article, maybe it's been about probably 7-8 years ago, and the whole article was talking about what you were just talking about. It was all about sleep and recovery and all this. And I'm just like, you know what? I had spent most of my 20s thinking that the program, the volume, that all of that stuff was the most important, and we realize is that that's only a part of the wheel.
Yeah, and I said that,
You know?
people always want to show me 2 years worth of workouts, and I look at the thing kind of somewhat
Graze it.
Yeah, this is all the muscle tissue you broke down.
Uh-huh.
Is what's in this book. Show me the book
That made you grow.
that made you grow.
Yeah.
Where's all the muscle tissue that you built?
Uh-huh.
You know, and that's what I do today. I haven't competed in 5 years, and I still have a checklist at home, a Excel spreadsheet every day of the month. All the things I need to do every day. I'm going to measure my body weight, all the meals I need to eat, the quality of my sleep, when I went to bed, when I woke up, and I track all of that. You know, everything that I do every single day, and those are the things that I try to incorporate into the programs that I do with athletes. Is to start to get them a checklist so they know that these things are important and we prioritize those things.
Right. And I think that's amazing. That's one of the best things I've ever heard. Well, who are your major influences in lifting and why? Like who are the guys maybe now and back when you started were really the guys that pushed you to where you're at?
You know, when I started, it was the guys that were on the cover of magazines at the top of their game. It was the Flex Wheelers of the world, the Ronnie Colemans, and the group that was competing back then, which was the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah.
And, I really didn't have a focus on strength necessarily, because it took me many, many, many years to get up enough size and strength to where I even had any strength.
Yeah, where you felt like you mattered in that
Yeah,
area.
I was a buck 35 and I couldn't bench 135 pounds. I had to take the 45s off and put the 35s on, embarrassingly so. And that's where it started. So it took me many, many years. Of course, we always watched the World's Strongest Man stuff on ESPN. Was awesome.
Yeah.
But I don't think I really followed strength sports too closely until I started training with Mark in 09.
Okay.
That was the first time I really pulled up the records and saw Konstantinov stuff.
Yeah.
And I that's the numbers that I want. And Mark was kind of like looking at me crazy because I'd never done numbers like that.
Yeah.
But we took a stab at it, and sure enough, it happened.
Yeah, I remember you hitting those numbers, and I was just like, holy shit. You were probably one of the main motivators that made me switch over based on, one, how you looked, two, your longevity approach, and three, I was like, I need to take all this fucking gear off and be as strong as this guy.
Yeah.
Because at that time, I had squatted a 1,200-pound equipped world record. I had hit over 2,700 on equipped totals, but everybody wondered, well, did I really know what I was doing, or was that all gear? Yeah. And I was tired of having that asterisk on, so I just stripped all the shit off.
And I didn't really consciously make a decision about gear or rod. The fact of the matter is I was primarily a bodybuilder.
Right.
And as a bodybuilder, you can't train in gear. And you have to learn the gear.
Right.
A couple of times that I tried it on, I realized that there's no magic to it. Everybody has a different design, and so I never trained in it, and I never intended to for any extended period of time.
Right.
So I really kind of had to do what I did.
Yeah.
And as far as the sport changing, during that time, I just think that I was fortunate to have been to have garnered the exposure from the bodybuilding industry.
Yeah.
Had it not been for my training with Flex Wheeler, getting that huge spread in muscular development, getting sponsored by Flex Magazine, doing the world's strongest pro bodybuilder, and all of the video and the attention that came to that.
Yeah.
That is kind of what opened up
the door,
and I think made people recognize the powerlifting in itself. If I had just done that, probably wouldn't have seen the same.
No, I think that's where you were the first one. I think that in this generation that bridged that gap where everybody's like, I want to be that strong and I want to look like that.
Yeah.
Because that was my thought pattern. The difference on mine is that because I had come from gear, but 2 out of every 3 weeks was in non-gear, I knew that I had that raw strength.
Yeah.
I just had to practice it more.
Yeah.
And but
it's also more relatable.
Yeah.
People understand, every high school kid in the country gets under a bench, they kind of understand what they're capable of.
And that's what was the first thing. I think in 2009 or 10, I was working at Ranger Regiment down at Fort Benning, and one of the guys had asked me how much I benched, and instead of even thinking, I just blipped out 840.
Yeah.
He's like, well, is that equipment? And I'm like, yeah, it's a shirt. Well, what do you do raw? Well, fuck, I don't know.
Yeah.
But that was when the first part, they didn't have any calculation on what that was, even though I knew I was strong underneath. So I pushed that. So that was pretty cool. So how did you get into helping, kind of changing gears, how did you get into helping Thor and Shaw with dieting? Because it's, even for us being bigger, stronger guys, that's a completely different side of extreme training and strongman. You know, those guys usually don't outlook for people for diets, but I see that Zadrunas is shredded.
Yeah.
I see that. I mean, Thor. Me and you have both been around him. You more than me, but that's the biggest, most cut guy that big I've ever seen.
It's ridiculous.
I mean, it's unbelievable. And that was when I was like, man, this pretty much works for just about everybody.
They're really pushing the envelope, those guys. And
Yeah.
you saw today, Brian Shaw posted a picture of himself with his shirt off and just looks ridiculous.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Massive.
To be able to be 400 pounds and have that much,
440.
400 plus
Yeah.
and be that insane is just crazy.
That's funny.
And-
Even if you look at pictures of both of them from a couple years ago, probably before you were working with them versus now. I mean, they weren't ginormous. I mean, they're ginormous, but they weren't like hugely fat dudes. But the difference in their body composition today versus a year or 2 years ago is
They carried a little
insane.
more body fat,
Yeah.
and they had a little less size in their shoulders and arms and traps. And
Yeah.
so now we're starting to see a composition change to where
Yeah.
they've gotten bigger up here and a little smaller down here.
Yeah.
To make a dude that's 6'8", 400 pounds look more intimidating is a pretty impressive feat.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
those dudes
Yeah.
are already kind of scary looking.
Yeah.
And now they're just monsters.
How'd you get into helping them?
Well, these are the things that I've done for myself for years. I've told
Right.
everybody I've done blood tests every month for almost 12 years. I've probably spent 50, 60 grand on blood tests in the last decade. And I manipulated my diet to gain and lose weight. Every powerlifting time I had to try and get as big and as strong as I could, and every bodybuilding time I had to get as shredded as I could and hold on to muscle tissue. So I'm really familiar with the kind of foods that you have to utilize to make those changes. I also know when I just dirty bulk that I carry a lot more fat and I don't necessarily get any stronger. I've been at 300 pounds
Shit weight.
shit weight, and I've been 280 stronger than I was at 300.
Right.
And had a lot better body composition.
I've noticed this, like when I first cut down the way Charles kind of showed us how to do it with his metabolic analysis, my strength went to the toilet.
Yeah.
And this time, when you started helping me, I've noticed that I am almost 30 pounds lighter than I was in November and still doing close to 50 reps at 225.
Yeah.
My top end strength's obviously a little less, but it was amazing how much it held on. I bet you it held on 20 to 30% better.
Yeah.
Basing off of what you were doing, which is doesn't feel nearly as harsh on a big guy because you're still allowing the carbs,
Yeah.
which is super awesome. But so, did you get that connection with Thor from Mark Bell, or
Yeah, for Jesse Burdick, really.
Yeah.
I had worked with a lot of powerlifters
Yeah.
for a number of years, particularly with the weight cuts, the water depletes and reloads. And so I got a little more exposure from that. But ultimately, it was the relationship with Mark and Jesse
Yeah.
and the trust that Hafthor and Brian Shaw have in them. And then working with Mark,
Yeah.
doing his diet and doing his blood tests and all his health issues that he had been going through, the 190 over something blood pressure, which was ridiculous.
Yeah.
So that was first and foremost what my priority was. And a lot of times when an athlete comes to me, they aren't feeling too good. They kind of feel like they've reached the end of their rope. They're putting on more fat than
Their inflammation is
muscle.
ridiculous.
They are tired. They
Yep.
might just not feel.
Yep.
They kind of lost the pep in their step or something.
Yep.
And they see me at my age, and I'm still going strong. Certainly I can't do the things I did years ago, but I'm healthy, and I can still perform
Yep.
very well. And it's it's attributed to the things I talked about
Yep.
outside the gym. So they came to Mark, referred to me, and we just started going to work. I think
gotcha.
that, one thing I should say is that a lot of people were concerned that there was some sort of conflict of interest because I'd worked with Hafthor for a year, and then Brian Shaw reached out and said that he wanted to change his nutrition program and do the vertical diet. And out of respect for Hafthor, I reached out to him. I said, Hafthor, Brian's reached out to me, wants a diet.
Yeah.
What do you think? And I should post his response because it was so respectful.
Yeah.
He says, absolutely. He said, I want Brian Shaw to be the best he can be, and I want to be the best I can be, and I want us to, to fight this out together.
Yeah.
Which I'm so excited about this weekend because
Yeah.
I feel like they both are
Peaked.
more.
Yeah. They had the training down. Now you got the other tools. It's going to be a show.
Yeah.
Although, to be honest, you and Thor did decide to put Shaw on a fast food diet.
That's right.
It's just, it's all lean beef, but
Yeah.
directly from Wendy's and McDonald's.
Yeah. So that was exciting to hear.
Yeah.
And, I had reached out to a couple of people that I respect in the UFC industry.
Yeah.
We talked earlier about Mike Dolce.
Yep.
Has a program. I reached out to him and asked him how he managed that when he had two fighters that were competing against each other or in the same weight class. And George Lockhart,
Yeah.
who we know from having trained John Jones and Conor McGregor and
Right.
Cyborg. And he said the same thing. He says, sometimes he'll ask the other athlete how they feel about it. He says, but in his experience, they're all for it.
Yeah, you find the top-notch guys, they really don't care.
Yeah.
I mean, they want to beat them because they all came up with their best game, not because they found an edge.
Yeah, and I found the same
You
thing
know.
when we had this whole thing about the world's strongest bodybuilder with Johnny Jackson.
Yeah.
That helps people take themselves to another level.
Mm-hmm.
I think it brings everybody's game up.
Yes.
I powerlifted harder, he bodybuilded harder.
Uh-huh.
I set world records in powerlifting, and he won shows and got onto the Olympia stage 5 years in a row.
Yeah.
And both of us were kind of not. I wasn't doing very well at bodybuilding at the time, and he wasn't doing very well at powerlifting at the time. So I just think everybody should have an
Pushes
opportunity
everybody out through there. That's awesome.
And I think that's one of the things it's one of the things I love about strongman competitions. And if any of our listeners have never been to the Arnold, it's worth going just to see in person those competitions, and you see a lot of that.
And the camaraderie.
Yeah, you'll see them on stage congratulating each other
Yeah.
and helping each other, cheering people on. Like last year, Thor was on stage cheering on Shaw and vice versa.
Yeah.
While they're trying to break records and win additional money and all this stuff. So it does seem like there's a lot of camaraderie in the sport.
I think it's like with our stuff, you push your body to the limit so hard that the ego part is over. Like, to me, I think once I felt like I'd accomplished some things, I wanted other people to succeed. But I think that comes with experience and age, and I think that helps a lot too. I think my transition point 5, 6, 8 years ago was huge. You come from a place that's got more negative energy, and then you start learning that that's not going to get you anywhere.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big thing. So I know you live in. Well, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask. So just while we're on the topic of Thor and Shaw, can you go into a little bit more specific about what you did for each of them? I mean, without giving away the whole program.
And there is no secret. I've coined the diet, the vertical diet, and however people feel about that is just because it defines my program. But it's just like when I started working with Flex Wheeler back in 2008. There's no rocket science. There's no magic. It's a marathon, not a sprint. It's hard work every step of the way. There are no secrets. Mm-hmm. And I've looked all over the world for them. I've trained with some great people. Yeah. I've learned from some great people. I've turned over every rock.
Yeah.
I've spent, just a disgusting amount of money trying to figure out if there was some, way to optimize performance. And when it comes down to it, it just comes down to the sensible, fundamentals and the consistency and discipline, sleep and eating correctly. And so that's really what I did with them. But I get in and start asking the questions that maybe they're not asking of themselves. And I do the blood tests, and I try and get behind the scenes and find out not just how much they're sleeping, but the quality of their sleep.
Yeah.
What are you looking for in the blood tests? So, and the reason I ask is I'm sure people.
Yeah, a whole host of things. Looking for deficiencies primarily. If they come up with a vitamin D deficiency.
Do you find that vitamin D, magnesium glycinate, those things can be heavily deficient in those guys?
Yes, iodine as well.
Iodine, yeah, I know we talked about that.
They train so hard and they're so big. And insulin resistance. If their hemoglobin A1C is elevated significantly, they're kind of a type 2 diabetes sort of borderline or in that area, you got to correct that, because otherwise they're not going to be shuttling nutrients into muscle. They're going to be storing more fat.
Right.
And they're going to be tired, and they're going to, it just sets off a whole cascade of other problems downstream.
Yeah.
So, I I get them to do blood tests, and we get in and we try and remedy those problems. I make sure they get a CPAP and on vitamin D. We fix their blood sugars. So
I'm just like Thor and Shaw. I'm on a CPAP.
See?
Not vitamin D deficiency.
It's the same thing.
Did you see, again, thinking about them specifically, because I think for a lot of people they're easy to visualize because they are so huge. Did you see anything significantly different in them than you did, say, powerlifters you've dealt with?
No, that's the thing.
Kind of across the board.
Yeah, it's across the board. Even dealing with Larry Wheels and helping him with his nutrition program,
yeah.
You find the same deficiencies. You find these guys that push themselves to a point where their micronutrients are usually shy of where they should be, And so that's what I do is I go in and now I try and find the types of foods that can complement all those areas. I want to find the most bioavailable sources of all of those micronutrients and get them to consume those primarily. He talks about it being the steak and rice diet.
Yeah.
And it is, fundamentally it comes from steak for a very good reason, because it's the world's only superfood.
Yeah.
And it's the only food that is that nutrient dense and supplies you that, both your all your micronutrients that you need, and not just so you can survive, but thrive.
Yeah.
There is no other superfood. Kale. I mean, how long can you live on kale?
Yeah.
Please, acai berry.
Yeah.
I don't care what it is.
I know when we were walking through the store, you made a great point. When have you seen a jack chicken?
Yeah.
And
Anybody ever seen a big chicken?
Never seen a big chicken?
Comparatively speaking, there's no comparison between the nutrient density of a chicken and a red meat. There's just not.
Yeah.
The B vitamins, in particular, are huge.
For sure.
So
I know when we were shopping.
I can't wait until we get some of those comments.
Yeah. I know when we were shopping for Thor, there's some key things that I think threw me way off guard because I had never seen it or really heard it, and I thought it was really interesting. One is why carrots?
Yeah, and people would think that would be vitamin A, but the fact of the matter is that's beta carotene, which doesn't convert well, to vitamin A in the body. Retinol is the actual usable form of vitamin A.
Right.
So it's not for that reason. There's a little bit of fiber in there. It's an anti-estrogen and aerogenin that I like it for. It's also a root tuber, so it provides some of the prebiotic benefit. But I'm cautious about how much of that to put in there, because a lot of those vegetables, particularly the indigestible fibers, can bring a bunch of what I call baggage with them. Certain foods, may be good for you in many ways, but they may also be bad for you when they have anti-nutrients involved, such as lectins.
And I think that's just the tricky thing that people, there's not really, other than what we're talking about with steak, there's not really a lot of foods that you can eat a ton of that have so much benefit to so much risk ratio. That's what I've learned a lot from you. What about chicken stock? Now, I know it's like, you first told do the monster mash. You do your bison and your rice, and then you pour chicken stock on it. I'm like, motherfucker, I hate like soup and crazy shit, but I've been doing it. But I just do it because I don't, you helping me out. I'm like, I'm not gonna ask him any fucking questions. Maybe one question a month. Why chicken stock?
Right. Or bone broth. And people like the idea of having collagen, protein, but the fact of the matter is that all proteins that you eat are going to be digested and converted into amino acids and then utilized as your body needs them.
Yes.
The collagen from bone broth doesn't all of a sudden go to your joints.
Right,
It just doesn't work that way. But for gut health, I realized an extraordinary improvement in
absorption
in my gut health.
Okay.
Improving the lining of the stomach.
Yes.
It's only one cell thick, and you start having some problems there. Next thing you know, you got absorption. You got you got indigestible starches leaking into the bloodstream and clogging things upstream.
Yeah.
Most importantly, to keep it as simple as possible, is regularity and the quality.
Awesome.
Of that. So you're not
that's interesting because I had never heard that before ever.
Yeah.
So I think for most listeners, at least on one side of the spectrum, it's never been me, but the average guy that's 170 and wants to weigh a Jack 205, we showed us going to the grocery store and getting 20 odd pounds of meat and all this shit. What would an average day's diet look like if a guy's 170 and wants to be jacked at 205?
Well, the most important thing to remember is that there's only one reason not to buy steak, and that's because it costs too much.
Right.
That's the reason people buy chicken.
It's cheaper.
Because it's cheaper. And sure, it's a good source of protein, but it lacks a lot of the micronutrients that I'm so adamant about including in the diet. And, the B vitamins, the zinc, the magnesium, the iron, the creatine.
So up the meat.
Definitely up the red meat. That's one of the first thing I would do. And then if they need a significant number of calories, one of the reasons that I grind the meat and barbecue it and then mix it with rice and chicken stock is because it's easier to digest. Ground meat has more surface area.
Right.
And so as you eat it, it's going to digest a little quicker, then you can eat more sooner.
Like pre-chewed almost if you grind it down.
Yep. Because when you're trying to gain weight, I believe in frequency over quantity.
Right.
You eat massive meals and you tend to burden the stomach and your digestive system. I talked about this in training your metabolism and gradually building up. And so the 170-pound guy, if he wants to bench 400 pounds, but he's currently benching 300, he can't go to the gym tomorrow, load 400 pounds in the bar and ask for a lift off. It'll crush him. Same thing's true if you try to eat Brian Shaw's diet tomorrow.
Fucking die.
You'd fucking
Yeah.
die.
Right, that's what we're doing.
It'd
Right.
totally overwhelm your body, and you wouldn't be able to
So what would you
digest
say
it.
the average caloric intake if somebody weighs 170, wants to weigh 200, they're going to have to gradually build that up. What would
It would be 500 calories more than they're eating now.
500 more than they eat now?
And people ask me a question all the time, and it's, well, you start somewhere, and whether that's doing your BMI and trying to calculate that, and your workload, and everybody has a formula. I usually just ask them, what are you eating now? And
Right.
try and replace at least that many calories.
Amazing,
But wherever you start, if you're not gaining weight, add 500 calories, and you could do that a number of ways. You can add 2 ounces of meat to each meal. You can add an entire meal. You can add half a cup of rice to each meal.
Right.
And that way, at least you start to establish a baseline.
Right.
And then every week or 10 days, you find out that you get a little hungrier.
Yeah.
You know, initially I give you the diet, and you're eating, and
Yeah.
you're like, oh, I'm full. 10 days later, all of a sudden, an hour after you eat,
You're
like,
hungry.
I could eat again.
I've noticed that this is about the 9th week I've been following what you've been telling me.
Yeah.
And I've noticed now that after I eat, I am absolutely fucking starving in like an hour and a half. I know my metabolism's going crazy, and I'm actually getting leaner, but my weight's not coming down as far. It's like I'm hardening up
And
at a
you feel
heavier weight.
incredible.
Yeah. So I haven't done my body fat percentage yet, but I feel as lean as I did last year at 262, and now I weigh 270.
Yeah.
You know.
The biggest piece of feedback that I enjoy getting is from Hawthorne, Brian in particular, and of course guys like Larry and even Dan Green. Dan Green's doing the vertical diet. Is how much better they feel. Mm-hmm. They just have more to invest into their training, and that's what I always focused on. That's why I ate and slept so well. So then when I went to the gym, it was euphoric.
It was 100 miles an hour.
Oh yeah, you go in there and just throw shit around for whatever long. Your endurance, your stamina, your recovery, everything improves as a result.
Yeah.
So the vertical diet, steak and rice, sure. You need, if your body's demanding a significant amount of proteins, fats, or carbs, you need to fuel that. You have to eat something. I look for the highest ROI, the foods that give me the biggest return with the least baggage.
Yep.
But I create a foundation of foods on the horizontal platform.
Yep.
You can't put a 3-bedroom house on a 2-bedroom foundation. So if you're eating, massive amounts of steak and rice, great. That's going to cover a lot of bases because steak is so nutrient dense. But now I ask athletes, where are you getting your vitamin A? Where are you getting your iodine? What are your sodium demands?
Right.
Where are you getting your vitamin D? Where are you getting your selenium? And they don't have answers to any of these questions, nor did I for the longest time. But if you go in and start carefully looking at each of these micronutrients, and that's not just vitamins, that's minerals, and if you understand that supplements don't answer that question because they're generally not in the form that your body utilizes. Right? They're synthetic, and they're not with the cofactors that allow your body to utilize them more efficiently.
Yeah.
Because most foods, if they're whole foods, natural foods, like a steak, they come with all of these things in a particular, all the cofactors. And so I ask those questions, and then I try and create, that's why I throw the carrot in there, that's why I threw the orange in there, that's why I throw the sweet potato in there, that's why I find iodine from whatever source. The cranberry juice is an awesome way to get iodine. And if I'm a little shy, say in omega-3s or something in a diet, because beef doesn't give you a lot of omega-3s, you can use a grass-fed, you get more CLA from that, conjugated linoleic acid. But you can throw in, say, a cod liver oil. It's going to give you, I just don't like the idea of looking to supplements. I don't like the idea of restriction and dividing foods up. Boneless, skinless chicken breast is a pretty dramatic restriction. Egg whites, even worse. Tilapia, all the things that bodybuilders would traditionally eat.
Yeah.
Do you think a lot of people get too weirdly specific about things like that?
I do too.
The all-natural, grass-fed, no GMO.
Yeah, that leads us to a question, because we had a
BS.
question on that. I posted what we were going to talk today and said any questions. And I noticed that when we went to Costco yesterday, we didn't get anything organic.
Yeah, the organic thing is, I just don't see the return on it. It's kind of a fad. It doesn't promise more nutrients. It's kind of the difference between, it just has not provided us more nutrient-dense foods. It's more people are concerned about the way in which it was grown, whether or not you used
Hormones.
hormones with meat or pesticides with vegetables. But vegetables have their own pesticides, and they could be subject to disease, as can animals. Antibiotics are used in like 99% of chicken. It makes them grow bigger. That's why they use them. It's part of their feed.
Yeah.
At least with cows, you pull them out of the stock, and so that there's a time under which that those antibiotics are supposed to be able to work out of their system before they're processed.
Yeah.
But I say this, and there's a lot of people who are a lot smarter about that stuff than me. Unfortunately, none of them agree.
Yeah.
And so I try and figure out
what's in the middle.
Yeah, where the rubber hits the road, what am I getting out of it? And when you compare, I'm a fan of grass-fed beef, but it's a good, better, best scenario. And if you can't afford that, you definitely should be using steak. If you can't afford steak and you're going to use chicken, then you need to shore up all the holes that have been left by the lack of micronutrients. The real difference between, say, a grass-fed steak and a commercially raised steak is the CLAs. It's the conjugated linoleic acid, because the omega-3 difference between the two is very small. And here's another thing I try and focus on. There's very few omega-3s in meat anyhow. So if grass-fed meat has twice as many omega-3s as commercial-grown meat, but that amount is still of such a small, it's not a...
It's still going from shit to suck.
Yeah, it's not where you look for those things anyhow. Go eat salmon. I do 2 servings of salmon a week in my diets, along with the cod liver oil, because that's where the omega-3s are in quantity, in a very absorbable, usable form. Obviously, you can't get those from vegetables because it's not the right form.
Well, and I think it's great to hear that, because I think there are a lot of people who think about doing meal preps and wanting to eat to either gain weight or to get stronger, and they think it's going to be crazy expensive. And you think about buying that quantity of food, but I think if you go and you look at the video we shot last night, which is on YouTube right now, you'll see that it's not as expensive as you think.
Well, you think about this, when you do that Monster Mash thing that you do, I do that all the time, and I calculate that to be about $3 a serving.
Yeah, compare that to eating out, and
holy
you're saving
shit!
a fortune.
When I eat like shit, question. You go get 2 double quarter pounders at McDonald's. That's $13.
Yeah.
So when people tell me that, I just like, oh my gosh, it's crazy.
There's a lot of things I avoid in the diet, and let me say this about restriction. Lane Norton's been writing about this for years, and he's brilliant on nutrition. He's talked about the difference between if it fits your macros and clean eating. And one of the primary problems with clean eating is that you end up restricting to the point where now you've created deficiencies in micronutrients. And the if it fits your macro diet, you tend to eat what you have an appetite for, and that's what's important. The body knows what it wants. If it goes out wanting for something salty, it's because it needs salt. And it will chase foods that it wants. And so even with guys like Hawthorne and Brian Shaw, when they were out eating what I call the traditional horizontal diet, which was IHOP for breakfast and Subway meatball sandwiches or burritos for lunch and pizza for dinner, that diet supported their success because it was not deficient, because they had such a broad spectrum of nutrients every day. Sure, it was too high in fat, and sure, they could have optimized a lot of things, but it can get you a long ways. I got them at the point at which they'd kind of maxed out on that kind of diet. And I needed to switch a few things for body composition, for health reasons we talked about, with the blood sugars, etc. So if you have to choose between eating chicken breasts and broccoli and eating pizza and IHOP, bacon and eggs, it's chicken breasts, or it's pizza and IHOP all day long. Because when you create deficiencies, now you just completely kill muscle growth.
Right.
And some people who...
Once the body starts to sense efficiency, muscle's the last thing it wants.
Yeah, you don't want to... You want to be at a surplus.
Yeah.
And that doesn't just mean calories, that means micronutrients as well. And if you can get those from a broad spectrum of foods, and maybe you're the kind of person that doesn't react negatively for a significant period of time.
What about the asshats that say that red meat causes cancer?
Well, the Pure study has recently been completed, or a portion of it. Dr. Yusuf, the head of the World Heart
we talked about this last
Association. I got to be careful not to compare him to the WHO, which is the World Health Organization, or the AHA, which is the American Heart Association, which is not a government organization by any stretch of the imagination. It's a non-profit company that gets the bulk of its money from canola oil and Procter and Gamble, who created Crisco, and
Yeah.
just the most disreputable group of,
horrible
of people
shit,
on the planet.
Yeah.
And that's your American Heart Association, putting heart healthy stamps on breakfast cereals and things like that.
Things that'll fucking kill you.
Yeah, just a horrific group of people.
Yeah.
So now you've got this Pure study that just came out, which was, I think it was well over 100,000 participants in 18 countries for, I think it was at least a dozen years, 15 years. And they tested all this stuff with a very high level epidemiological study. They tracked urine samples in many of them for sodium excretion so they could measure sodium intake. And it was a very high quality study, and what they discovered was manyfold. One of which is that there's no upper limit, as we know now, because here in the U.S. they're saying it as well. Finally, for cholesterol consumption, and it doesn't negatively impact cardiovascular disease or all-cause mortality. If anything, the study showed it has a protective effect. Saturated fats have a protective effect. And if you look at Western
Serrano's been saying this for years.
Yes.
Which makes him crazy to a lot of people, but...
And it made me crazy when I would tell parents to feed their kids whole milk and eggs and steak and bacon. They would look at me like I was crazy. I was trying to kill their kid. But those kids performed. And these athletes perform on that kind of diet.
Yeah.
I make a few adjustments to that based on the level that they're at. But nonetheless, there was this, I think, a group that categorizes whether... I'm forgetting the name off the top of my head, whether or not something is likely carcinogenic.
Yeah.
Well, out of like 11,000 things that they've looked at over the last 20 years, 10,999 of them went on possibly carcinogenic, including coffee at one point. And I'll tell you what's more carcinogenic than steak: air. Breathing air is more carcinogenic than steak.
Especially in California.
Yeah. So, but the Pure study did find that cholesterol and animal fats were protective.
Wow.
You know what they didn't find? They didn't find that vegetables were protective.
That's
The
interesting.
same study.
Yeah.
They did find that fruits were protective. Now, caution being had to how you consume, not fruit juice, fructose, and what a measure.
Yeah.
My diet includes fruits, and it can include some fruit juice, but it's based on fructose's ability to stimulate the liver and the thyroid. And there's a limit to how much you take in a day. 75 to 100 grams a day is about all the liver can hold. Beyond that, you start getting into those metabolic problems.
Right. What about, now we've talked a lot about gaining, right? What about, we have questions on thoughts on cutting.
You know, it's fascinating. I mentioned this on my 10-minute walk talk that I use the 10-minute walks for athletes who are trying to gain weight with a calorie surplus because it stimulates insulin sensitivity, right? And it helps with recovery, et cetera, and digestion and bloating and gas.
Right.
I also use it for female competitors who are trying to compete in bikini or physique or figure for many of the same reasons, but they're at a calorie deficit. So it's easier for them to utilize calories for building muscle or for glycogen retention as opposed to storing as fat because of the 10-minute walks increasing insulin sensitivity.
Right.
And
digestion.
And digestion is huge. The big thing for women is that they're overly restrictive and they lose a lot of micronutrients and their thyroid starts to shut down as a result. And they do too much cardio, which also causes the metabolism to slow down. And there was a couple of studies, one not too many years ago came out regarding they put pedometers, I think this is in Japan, on two different groups of people, and one group walked 10,000 steps a day. You hear that now, the 10,000 steps. I got to get my 10,000 steps in.
That's where that probably came from.
Possibly. Well, the other group, they put pedometers on them, and they said take 3 10-minute walks a day, brisk. You want to get your heart rate elevated, right? This is you're actually trying to get a little bit of
a little bit of a workout in.
A little bit of a workout. The group that did the 3 10-minute walks logged only 4,000 steps a day. The group that logged 10,000 steps a day, walking throughout the day, the group that did the 3 walks, 4,000 steps a day, improved body composition, improved health markers such as blood sugar, such as cholesterol, to a greater degree than the group who did 10,000 steps. They did, a third of the work.
But more of the benefit.
But it garnered more of the benefit. And so I do believe in obviously, this isn't news that HIIT training's optimal, and that the steady state endurance stuff does slow your body down and has diminishing returns over time. You start walking on that treadmill for 40 minutes, and then 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks later, you're burning fewer calories for that time invested.
Right.
Plus, you're releasing hormones that catabolize muscle tissue,
Yeah.
and because it's
So the key
it's
is walking
endurance.
that tightrope of
Yeah.
giving yourself a little bit more stimulation to increase insulin sensitivity, but not so much you start shutting your engine down.
Correct, because you want to be, I've said that your body responds to the stimulus provided. And if you want to walk the treadmill for 40 minutes, you're going to get the body that replicates that kind of activity.
Right.
Right? You're going to look like a distance runner. But if you want to look like a sprinter or a bodybuilder, then you need to stimulate the muscle. And ideally, you want to do that more frequently, a morning and evening workout. Flex had me training 40, 50 minutes in the morning and 30 minutes at night. And it was all muscle stimulation stuff, hypertrophy, growth stuff.
Right.
We know that when you work, you increase insulin sensitivity, glycogen retention. You also increase muscle protein synthesis, and it happens when you're doing the work.
Right.
So if you work more often, then you're going to increase those very valuable growth, enhancing. So with women, now back to diet, they tend to restrict egg whites, chicken breast, tilapia, broccoli. They're missing so many important nutrients. Plus, they restrict fats. They're afraid of fats. And they end up eating just some proteins and some vegetables for carbs. The problem is that all the nutrients are in the fats, and the ability to absorb the nutrients depends on having the fats as a shuttle. Every cell in the body is surrounded by a fatty layer, and that fatty membrane.
We're meant to eat fats.
We're meant to eat fats, and the research shows when you look at saturated fat, monounsaturated fat, polyunsaturated fat, there's no difference. If anything, the saturated fats show a protective effect, and the people with the higher saturated fat consumption had the lower body fat, had the a more ideal.
Yeah, it's
body
amazing.
composition.
I probably eat, I'd say 30% more fat than I ate when I was 315 pounds.
Yeah.
And I'm getting leaner every week, every month.
The Pure study showed us that as well. When you get over 50% in carbohydrates, you start to see an increase in cardiovascular disease and all-cause mortality.
Yeah.
And so we'd be cautious about how much carbs. I put a decent amount of carbs in my athlete, but they're also eating plenty of protein and plenty of fat as a result. So the fats are in the meat. They're in the steak. They're right there for you.
You don't have to add it in.
You don't have to.
That was the last question that we had was, we have a guy that has someone who can't, and I thought it was an interesting question, someone who can't eat nuts, avocados, and that nature.
Yeah, nor do they need to. I mean, there's some monounsaturated fat in there, but there's a lot of anti-nutrients in nuts.
If we get the meat, the right kind of red meat, we don't have to worry about any of that, correct?
You don't have to, and it's in the most bioavailable form that you can utilize very easily. So those are important. Nuts, you got to be kind of cautious. Yes, the Pure study showed nuts to be a benefit. The Mediterranean diet in particular, which is high fat, high sodium, by the way. People seem to forget that when they're talking about how great the Mediterranean diet is. So no, you don't necessarily need nuts. There's nutrients in there, but there's nutrients in many animal sources that can provide you the same value with less baggage. I call it fewer anti-nutrients. And it's so hard to paint with a broad brush when talking about this stuff because there's so many people, small percentages of the population are afflicted by different, allergies or medical issues. And if you're salt sensitive, don't eat a bunch of salt.
Right.
If you're allergic to peanuts, you can't eat peanuts. If you're lactose intolerant, you can't drink milk.
Yeah, it's not the end of the world.
No. So I try and find those things out and then utilize different methods. But I don't expect that my diet's a fix-all for everybody.
Yeah.
My diet is for performance.
Yeah.
And as in so much as I said that what was the difference between health and fitness, because they're not the same thing. And I did that rant about health and fitness. In so much as health benefits the fitness, then I focus on that.
Right.
But at some point, you're going to need to fuel the workload and try and optimize performance. And some of those things may come, with some negative effects.
Well, yeah.
Because you're pushing your body to
things it's not supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
So basically what you're saying is overall, create a baseline. Play with the things you need to play with after the baseline's set.
Yeah.
To find out what you need and what you can withstand.
Let me be more specific. Throw in a couple of eggs with the yolks because you're going to get the choline and you're going to get some iodine in there and there's going to be some cholesterol in there. But can you eat 24 eggs? Probably not because they tend to be a high allergen. And so, they're in my foundation if they don't cause you any negative effects. But I don't build the vertical axis with eggs. Throw in a sweet potato. Throw in, I said an orange. Throw in, the chicken stock.
What I like about what you figured out with the diet is the same thing I figured out with training is there's no black and white. There's only gray.
Yeah.
And then you find out what you can best fit you and do what you can do.
Well, and anybody can copy and paste a diet program and hand it to someone.
Yeah, which is the
Yeah.
basically what people get
What
now.
they do. But what
Yeah.
happens at 1 week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 8 weeks into the program when things aren't working the way they want and they come back with questions? Do you know how to respond to those? Do you know what questions to ask to get to the bottom of those questions? So that's where these diets start to change, is in the application, when athletes come to me and say, this isn't working for me, this is working for me. And so I create, the foundations might be different for different people.
Mm-hmm.
Some people might have a problem with the acid from oranges, and you have to switch and find a different fructose source that can still stimulate the program.
Yeah.
So it is different, but I'm still building on the least offensive, objectionable foods.
Yeah.
The steak and rice does at some point start to be about the only thing you can eat in mass that provides you all the benefits with very little
The risk
of the risk.
Yeah. So where can people find you?
It's a great thing about having a unique name. StanEfferding.com is my website. Stan Efferding is my YouTube. At Stan Efferding is my Instagram.
Yep.
So it's all there. So you can
Yeah.
find StanEfferding@yahoo.com is my email.
Yep. Then you've also invented the cooler.
Yeah, the cooler is still, it's winter time, so it's
Yeah.
not too many people need to keep things cold in the winter, but
But I don't
summer's coming.
I don't think
so.
you had to ship any back from the last Arnold, though.
No.
You were out of them in probably, I think, the first day.
Yeah, I ordered a little more this year, so
Which
hopefully
is
we'll be able
awesome.
to- It was good for me. I could go watch the strongman. I didn't have to hang at my booth.
So which booth are you at the Arnold?
2422, the cooler booth.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, if you want to see Stan and check him out, go to the Arnold, and we'll see you guys there.
All right.
Awesome.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you once again for joining us here on the Wenning Strength Podcast. Don't forget to check out wenningstrength.com and wenningstrengthmedia.com for all of your training needs. And while you're at it, subscribe to us on iTunes and Stitcher. And if you get a chance, give us a 5-star review. We appreciate it. We'll see you next time on the Wenning Strength Podcast.